Hi, I'm Mark Stokes, creator of Zombie Boy Comics, and you're watching Two Geeks Talking.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We are joined today by a longtime friend. I have known him on Twitter for over 10 years. I have read his comic. I have been fortunate enough to be part of his GabFest internet conventions, as I'm going to call it, because I don't know what else to call it. And I have also enjoyed his artistic style and the fact that he's just an awesome person all around. So it is with great regard that I can bring forth the creator of Zombie Boy Comics from zombieboycomics.com, Mark Stokes. How are you doing today, Mark?
Hey, Kurt, how are you? I'm good. Just keep talking. I'm enjoying the intro. I don't hear this very often, so if you want to say a few more things, that nice things about me, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I could
No, but
always talk
I do
about you.
appreciate. No, it's a real privilege to be here on your show with you because I've always been a fan of your work and the stuff that you've done for the industry. I think you've been really instrumental and actually you've been around a while, so I feel like you really know what you're talking about.
Well, I hope so, but I can always fake it too, like the rest of them. But that being said, though, thanks for coming on the show, Mark. Truly, let's jump into it here because it has been you've been in this industry a lot longer than people realize. 10 years for Zombie Boy Comics, but if I read correctly off your website, you've been doing this since 1987.
I had my 30th anniversary with Zombie Boy the character back in 2017. He originally started off as comic book character. I did that numerous interpretations of that over a period of about 15 years. Took a little break, and back in 2010, I brought him back, the character back as a comic strip. So it's been a comic strip now for going on 11 years.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I never thought when I created this guy that I would be stuck with him for over 30 years. But then again, I think he's been really instrumental in keeping me creative because I have done a lot of other projects, but I keep coming back to the concept. The comic strip, Zombie Boy Comics, as in its interpretation now, is less of a zombie boy and really more of all the other characters that I've created that go kind of in the zombie boy universe. And I'll go maybe months before I even have Zombie Boy actually in the comics because I'm having so much fun with the other characters. It's interesting. People will tell you when you create a comic strip and you start coming back to the characters over and over again, that at some point the characters will write the strip themselves. I've actually I carry a little sketchbook around with me and I'm jotting notes all the time. And at some point I'll be just sketching something, doodling something out, and all of a sudden the character is talking and I'm like, oh, okay, so I'll just run with this. And the gag writes itself. It's really interesting. When you really know the character, the personality of the individuals, it makes it a lot easier. You're not having to sort of rewrite every strip because you kind of sort of know how each character thinks. And they think for themselves. A lot of creators will tell you that.
I've always found that interesting because I've heard that so many times over the years, and to a certain extent, I've kind of understood it because it's because you're creatively invested in your characters that they speak with you. I mean, that or you're having a one-sided conversation with yourself. But other than that, I mean, I'm glad that they speak with you after 30 years.
I've experimented over the last, I would say, pretty much since I started doing a comic strip. I like to do silent strips where it's just 3 or 4 panels of just visuals with nobody saying anything. Those are the strips that really write themselves because nobody's really saying anything. You just set the situation up with a character, and then over a matter of 4 panels or whatever, a little synopsis will develop, and then there'll be a punchline. Hopefully it'll be worth it at the end. And those completely write themselves because when I'm doodling out my sketchbook, I'm like, oh, okay, and I'll just sketch it out. I won't even. It's not even really a thought process in some way. A lot of people that write strips will tell you that they're always, and you know this, I'm sure from a lot of other people telling you this interviews wise, is you have a character talking and you're trying to condense all of what they're saying into the simplest and the less wordy way of telling it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think when you start cramming a lot of copy into panels, into word balloons, me personally, if it looks so much, if the word balloon's bigger than the character and there's more stuff going on, I'm not reading it. I'm just gonna hope that the next page there's an explosion or something, you know. Because
the Michael Bay version of comics, then.
Exactly. I make my strips for myself. If I'm not enjoying the process or if I'm not enjoying creating it, there's no point in it. The worst situation that an artist can be in is if they, like, say for instance, I was hired to be the next the person to take over the Blondie strip, or as an aside. I'd be miserable doing a job like that. I mean, more power to those people that can do it, and I have the total respect for them. But I just could not sit and work with somebody else's characters and creations and try to put my shoes on those characters. I just couldn't do it, and it would drive me nuts because I feel like I was trapped. When you're working with your own characters, you have a rapport with what's happening. A good example of that is in my strip, I have a character called Gore, and it's this demon dog. It's a dog, but I imply that he might also be a demon. But he's based on my a pet that I owned for 14 years. It was a little pug. He has really become his own character. I never imagined when I created the comic strip that he would actually even be a character. But over the time has passed, and I bring him and I come up with new ideas, and he never talks. So I think the strips, like the Snoopy strips, where Snoopy is reacting and it's all about his expressions and maybe he's thinking about something, but he never comes out and speaks. And even Woodstock, you know how Woodstock talked with those little sticks?
Yeah.
They're like little.
Yeah.
Well, there's something that's part of this art form that I love the most, and that is that you can say things with comics that you can't say in any other medium, and things like timing and the rhythm of a comic, just even an expression on a character's face can say a lot more than if you were to put a whole paragraph of copy.
It's also like the Buster Keaton silent films of the past. Is you shove everything into the simplest actions you can perform. And I mean, your lower third is a perfect example with Gore and the flower pots, and then your little chicks on the side there as well too, which was hilarious when I saw.
Okay, so the gag is that there's a whole bunch of little chicks, and the center chick has a little piece of candy, and he's looking at it. He's licking his little chicken lips, if chickens have lips. And he's about to take a bite at it. Of course, all these other chickens they're leaning in, looking at him. They're like, that looks really good. Well, in the middle of the pandemic, I decided, well, I'll just have that chick just, and then as soon as he coughs, everybody scatters. Everybody's afraid to get, whatever that's going around. And he has peace. In the final panel, he's enjoying his little piece of candy.
Yeah.
Well, about 4 or 5 months ago, I was just scanning Google, and I saw this strip, a comic strip, and it was from 1917, and the strip was the exact same gag. It was just done over 100 years before I thought of it. And it's not like it's an original thing. I have my own thought process about what's original and what's not, but we can talk about that. But the gag was the guy was on a bus, I guess, and he was kind of hanging on to the little strap, and everybody was crowding him in, and he was like, I can't handle this. So he coughs, and then the final frame, everybody's way off to the sides of the panel, like, but this was back during the Spanish flu. So I saw that and I was like, ideas transcend time. It's not really, it's the experience that is universal. And I think that's why I really like my silent strips so much, because it does not require you to have an understanding of the language. The language is in the visual. to me, that's the wonder of comics. In fact, I've done animation, and I love how animation works. But animation is one step beyond comics, and that is they tell a story, and you don't have to use your imagination. It's all done for you. You know, the sound effects, the lighting, the music, everything is orchestrated to take you to a certain moment on that in that film or video. But with comics, it's a matter of 1 frame, 2 frames, 3 frames, 4 frames. And if you don't tell the story clearly and within the reason of the time frame that you have, then it was like you failed. That did not work. But you also have the additional elements of I can never remember the name of this word, but it's the sound effects.
Onomatopoeia.
Good for you. I'm glad you're here. Well, that's a weird word, and it's actually spelled weird too. You think that I would remember that? These are all tools in a comic strip artist arsenal. You have your sound effects. You have your and even like if people are talking, you have the addition of changing their word balloons. Like if I said something to you, Kurt, that was really rude and mean, I could actually draw my bubble with these little icicles hanging off the bottom of the bubble, and it'd be like I could actually make the bubble look like it was icy cold that I said to you, and I wouldn't have to explain it to a person. They would see it and go, "Ooh, he just got," I guess it would be burned. I'm talking more like people like who create and write and draw. It's all together. We have the ability to visualize it and then orchestrate it. Sometimes you fail, you do it, and sometimes people will tell you, I spent so much time on this and I just thought it was going to just be the best comic strip I've ever made. And then it flatlines, you post it and you get like hardly any responses. And then like a week later, you're running out of time and your deadline's here. And I'm going to go ahead and just post this piece of crap that I jotted down over the last, I didn't even spend a third of the time I normally would, but I needed to get it done. And it gets like the biggest reaction. It's like, I don't get it. I think there's a certain overall feeling that the less you care about it to some degree, the more it's overall accepted. You're not sweating and stressing about it. I think there's a certain flow.
It's not the amount that you don't care about it. It's the fact that it doesn't matter what you create. Whoever views it is subjectively going to either like it and share it, or they're going to just like it, or they're just going to view it and not worry about promoting it. And that's consistent with today's society when it comes to how media is consumed and how art is consumed and how everything is consumed. The phrase art is subjective is realistically, and I still think it's subjective to personal opinion, but it's how you experience and how you view the art. But when I said that to my art teacher, when I went for my double major in visual arts and film, she led into me for about 45 minutes because no, art's not subjective. This is what the artist is trying to convey. It's like, well, to a certain extent, yes, but when it comes to the amount of media that is consumed on such a rapid basis, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, whatever, a minute's worth of time is apparently too long for some people.
That's a really good point, and I'd like to kind of talk about that for a second. I think that we're in a fantastic, exciting time.
Yeah.
But that has its pros and its cons. One of the pros is, and it's probably the same thing as a con, the pro is, oh my gosh, look at this buffet that we have here that we can look at. The problem with it is you only have so much time to absorb, and really for me, frankly, I get overloaded. I'll be going on Instagram and I'll be scrolling. You get to a point where you're just oversaturated. I cannot look at any more art or what somebody else is doing that seems a lot more successful than me. You have to sort of just detach a little bit from it, because I think that it'd be wonderful to be able to go into the Louvre, for instance, and in an hour see everything that's in the Louvre. And I've never been to the Louvre, but I've heard that you can't even spend a day in one room in the Louvre. There's so much there. So you imagine cranking and packing all that into a 1 hour or 2 hour experience. How are you going to savor something that you really like when you have all this other stuff? It's like a buffet, and it's just rolling by, and you pick out what you want.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with that is, I don't know about you, but I can only eat so much food at a buffet. I used to be one of those people that would just pile my plate like a mountain full of food. But now I only can I'll eat just what I think I can eat in one plate, and then I can always go back.
Yeah.
But by the time you finish your first plate, you're done. But on the other side of that is, as a creator, you are just one little tiny part of that menu. That buffet is international, and it's huge. And you can get lost in the buffet,
For sure.
There's so much competition and so many people trying to do the same thing that you're trying to do. Compare it.
I compare it to Chicken Little saying the sky is falling, because.
So what do you mean? What do you mean?
Well, in the sense that you're inundated with so much so quickly, and even if you have one person, an influencer or whatever, yelling at the top of their lungs, "Oh my God, this is what's happening to me in my life," etc. People draw their attention to it, and then all of a sudden they realize it's all staged. But when it comes to artists and creators, people that I've talked to over the past 12 years that have become friends, and seeing their struggles, not only with the amount of content that they feel that they have to create just to get noticed, or to keep consistent in the algorithms of the technology that we're now all struggling with. It's difficult in the sense that, like, even with my own stuff, if I don't post on a weekly basis, I get buried under technology. Yet I've been doing this for 12 years. I think that the amount of content that I've previously created, if I were to transfer it over and just release it on a weekly basis, will it get noticed as much? Probably not. Will it help me a little bit? Sure. But I'm one voice out of millions, billions for that matter. And to showcase what I can share, and to showcase creators like yourself, it's difficult in the sense that I want you guys and everyone that come on the show to get noticed. But I can only do so much.
I understand. And when I first started doing the comic strip, I kept to I posted 3 times a week religiously. I never missed. I mean, even if I was sick, or if I had to do it at the very last minute, I met my deadlines. But things have changed since then. Now it's not so much a matter of people coming back to see your strip. They're not getting your comic strip anymore in the ways that they used to. RSS is really non-existent, and people really don't want to go to your website. People, you mentioned this earlier. People are really, they have a short attention span, which is getting ever shorter and ever tinier. I feel like if I'm going to spend 6 or 7 hours on a piece of artwork and I'm going to drop it on Instagram, and people are going to just scroll right past it, because there's another drawing right past mine that's even better or even more complicated. It's never ending. It's like you can't stop shoveling the coal, because as soon as you stop, the whole machine will stop. It's complicated, and it's daunting. Like I said, creative people have a tendency to be less business minded and more, I just want to do what I want to do. I just want to draw, or I want to make music, or I want to paint, or I want to dance. But the reality is, you have to have a balance between both of those things. Or if you want to just draw in your sketchbook and show it to some of your friends, that's great. I don't personally make my comic strips so much for anybody else but myself. And then if I do one, as a matter of fact, hope this doesn't come across as egotistical. Yeah. I'll go back through some strips. Somehow I needed to do some research on something that kind of, I refer to something I did before. And I'll see a strip and I'm like, could I, and today, could I do that strip now? Could I do a strip like that now? Because I think even creators change over time. You get to the point where you've done something before and you don't want to do that again. And really, basically, comic strips, what comic strips are all about. I've done that like 10 times, but variations of the same gag.
Yeah.
And people will say, what was it that Schultz said about you're telling the same strip 5 days a week, but you're trying to be original each week or something like that. Something along that lines. Getting back to the whole social media thing, man, that is anybody that really has captured that or understands that, I'm more power to. I've been around a long time, and it changes constantly. I mean, it's like the algorithms now. Even 6 years ago, you could get on Facebook and you could post something on Facebook, and it would reach a ton of people. I mean, you get a lot of responses. But now you put something up there, and you'll look and see who's liked it or whatever, and it's like, what happened? I didn't do anything different. I'm doing basically kind of what I did before. It's just there's an arcane science to it all. There's something behind the scenes that we don't.
Well,
and they constantly change it too. So once you think you've learned it,
Yeah, but that's the thing though. It's about consistency, and here's the problem that I've seen recently with social media, the last 5 years or so. Since all of the social medias are usually either bought out by Facebook or all basically merged into one particular area, and it has their different names. Like Facebook owns Instagram, Facebook owns, I think, Twitter or whatever else they own. Who knows? Either way,
probably they do.
More than likely. But because you have one, and this is like phone companies as well, if you have an oligopoly over your entire industry, if you have 3 companies that own basically the entire country, you're only stuck with those 3 choices, even though there's sub choices that they've all bought out, like, etc. It's the same thing for social media. So if you're posting on one, and Gary Vaynerchuk does this very well. It's like you post on one content creator, and you have to basically take your content and then have it be submitted to every other social media consistently every single day on a set schedule, so that you're not doubling your work. So if you post your photo that you've just spent 6 hours working on, or your image or your comic that you spent 6 hours working on, to Facebook, you're getting under 10%, if probably less by now, 5% of the total people that follow your page is going to see it unless you pay for it. The same thing for Twitter, same thing for Instagram, same thing for even TikTok, for that matter, which is one of the updated versions of social media for 1 minute only content. So even if you were to do an artist's drawing sped up to fit in that 1 minute, you're going to get thousands of views maybe, because people are constantly scrolling through and they'll catch your eye. But it all depends on hashtags. It all depends on SEO. It all depends on everything that you're still stuck trying to either understand or try to have a computer help you with that type of information if you're not as knowledgeable with it. And even if you ask people, content creators, etc., they're all about, this particular social media, let's take Instagram for example, you're posting Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Okay, even if you're automatically doing that type of content, that's only one social media. You have to do the same for everything else. You have to do the same for Facebook, which you're only going to get 5% of your viewership or less. You're going to do the same for Twitter. You're going to do the same for everything else. And the burnout factor, and this is what I've always experienced, is you have one piece of content that needs to go to 51 different aspects to be even viewed, possibly. And you're still not making money off of it unless you do that consistently.
Well, and that also gets to another point, and that is, you were talking about how the big companies buy out all the smaller companies, and then it becomes Facebook Incorporated. So if you're not high up on the rankings in that particular group, you're going to be you're already kind of behind the
8 ball, yeah,
behind the 8 ball or whatever. But the same thing goes for these like webtoons and tapas. Yep. These are big sites that comic strip creators put their work up there, and then it's just like a mirror site to their own personal site. But that gets back to the same thing. If you're not one of the top tier creators, and you already have established a career with something like webtoons, you're basically at the bottom, and it's just like any other social media. The only difference is it's just another outlet for you to get your work out there.
Yeah.
But I mean, the frustration factor there is that, they all have different formats, so you have to reformat everything to fit their format.
Yeah.
So the whole the busy work of doing, like, you do one strip and you have 5 different variations of it. It's exhausting.
Yeah.
And that's just one day. That's just one strip. I mean, we're in a weird time because it's very transitional, and I just keep feeling that the next big social media thing hasn't really arrived yet. And then the next one's going to come along, and it's going to be huge, and everyone's going to jump on there, and that's going to be okay for a while, and then Facebook will buy that, and it's just like it's a
carnival.
It's almost like a treadmill. You just can't ever get off of it, you know.
Yeah.
And I more power to you. You obviously have a better understanding of the general thing. I guess I'm just at heart lazy about social media. I don't really want to take all the time. And I mean, in your case, it's kind of, you've got it set up to where you have established how you work and what your content creation is, and where you're going to put that content and when you're going to post that content. And you have you got that down, which is what any creator could do. But see, I've never really invested all that time. I'd much rather spend my time doing something creative rather than spend my time, social media is, I really only use basically Twitter mostly, and a little bit of Facebook. Facebook is basically that part of the museum that nobody ever goes to. It's that quiet. There's like an old guy that's sitting on the bench, and he's like, "Oh, a customer, I'm going to get up." It's not happening. I mean, it used to be the place. I used to get a lot of engagement there, and I used to get tons of engagement on Twitter. And Twitter, over the last 5 years or 4 or 5 years, it's really just it's turning into kind of a quiet zone. It's a great place to talk and discuss and have a great communication with people, but the engagement that I used to have as opposed to now, it's really interesting. I haven't lost any followers, but at the same time, I haven't really gained that many followers on Twitter, and that's all about promotion and spending some time and spending time to develop. And like I say, I'd much rather take that time that I have to do something and work on something that I really enjoy doing. So it's catch-22, and like you say, you're a one-man operation. Most creators I know, we're one-person operation. There's only, my friend describes it as the rules of the 80-20 rule. And that is, like, you want to spend 80% of your time creating and 20% of your time, or 30% to 70%, doing the things that you need to do to promote your work. You have to balance it.
The creation of art, the creation of media, the creation of content for the masses is difficult, and it almost sometimes feels like a waste of time, to the sense that this is keeping us sane to a certain extent. Pandemic aside, this is what we do for our creative outlets. This is how we survive what's going on through our brains, anxiety, depression, etc. This is our outlet. But it comes back to, does our content that we create help the masses? And the good thing about what you're doing, not only with your comic, but what you're doing with GabFest, and this is how we're going to segue into the social media, is that you're providing an outlet for creators and content. And the fact that you're actively doing this on I think it was a bi-weekly basis or something like that.
Yeah.
It's every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
You're providing that outlet for the masses. You're providing it for fellow content creators, whether they're famous or whether they're just beginning. You're giving them that outlet to speak, to air their frustrations or air their outlets, their mindsets, to help the masses. Yeah, this is what I've experienced, but this is how I got out of it. And so you're providing a great place for those that are creative to find it. Like for me, I love like looking at your feed. I have a specific Twitter feed for GabFest because I want to see the questions. I want to see.
It's fun, isn't it? It's fun
is.
to go back and read what people have written, and even myself as sort of the quote unquote moderator, I sometimes miss things, some little asides that somebody had said, and when I go back and read it, I can, oh, okay, yeah, that was really interesting. That was a direction that could have been taken, but we went over this way instead, But the best part about GabFest is that it's a shared experience, and if you really want to engage some creative people, just ask them to talk about themselves, because we'll ask a question and it'll be something like about the process, or how do you get over a creative block, or have you ever decided you wanted to change careers? Just basic questions, or even like what tools do you use? And some of those are really just basic questions. But it's interesting when you we have like a chat room, I guess you could say, that's open to the entire world. We get people that come from all around the world that join in and throw in their comments and talk about the questions that we're asking. And it's funny, I've set up the GabFest to where it is like randomly about four or five questions, and at some point it'll deviate so far off from the question. I mean, it'll instigate a discussion about something that's really kind of like in periphery of the question, but that conversation is actually much more interesting than the actual question was. So it's very organic. It's very organic. But I agree with you. I think it's a great avenue for people to share common experiences. At the beginning, it started back in March of 2020, right after the pandemic hit. And I thought, well, you know what? I've got a lot of free time. I'm not working right now. Maybe there's other people out there that might want to, share what's happening with them. And the original few weeks, month or so of the GabFest was really basically us just grousing about what was happening. How as creative people, how we were handling, how we were able to continue to create. And were we doing things that related to what was happening outside in the great big world, and how we were managing to keep our own personal joy of what we're doing and passing that joy on to other people. Now, I'm saying that generally because everybody's not a joyful creator. Some people create, gothic horror and whatever. But my point is that when you put a whole bunch of creators, I mean, Twitter is a great venue to bring a bunch of people together for a discussion, and it's been really successful, and it has slowly built over the last year. It's been, let's see, March. It's been just over a year since we started, and we just went through, I can't even remember. I think we were on our 25th biweekly. So that's getting up there pretty good. And I have to tell you, the support of everybody that's been involved with it's been just amazing. I just did it I started it as just like an outlet to talk, to spend some time with some other creators, and it really kind of sort of like it went from there. And we have comments from people. Sometimes it's really interesting because when you do something like an online convention, you don't really know exactly how many people. A lot of people are lurkers. They'll just read the conversation and they'll go, "Ooh, that was interesting," and then they may not say anything. And somehow the only way I know that they're contributing is if they retweet something that somebody said inside the conversation. So I know that amongst all the people that are actually conversing, there's probably twice or three times as many people that are just reading or following the discussion. And it's interesting. I've had people write me and say, "Hey, that last GabFest was really great. I wasn't able to participate, but I read it and I followed what it was going on." And but the best part is to be able to participate. So those of you out there that do watch it or follow it, you know, your voice is important. If you have something to say, I mean, even if it's you know, that's Stokes guy, he's an idiot. What the heck is he talking about? That's still part of the process, you know. And you have participated. I was so happy when you joined in the first time you joined in, and it was like I felt like I really arrived at that point because Kurt Sasso's on board. I know, right?
But and the good thing about GabFest is that, you know, that's how I got Brett Giuliano on the show, and that's how I got that other oh jeez.
Well, there some of those guys have been there since the beginning, and like Brett is, I just really admire Brett. He's just such a great. He's a powerhouse. I mean, the man can. He's a creator. He's a businessman. He's an organizer. He's helped me behind the scenes a little bit too on some of this stuff.
Awesome.
But I feel like amongst all the people that are involved in that, there's a core group that kind of keeps coming back every time, and I can always count on those people having their own conversations within the conversation. So it's very organic. I really honestly never have an idea of where it's going to go. And sometimes I'll have set questions, but we never get to those final maybe one or two questions because the conversation veered off and it went off into this direction, and it was really more interesting than how it started. And I don't want to stop, you know, I don't want to, you know, it's almost like some wild horses, you know, you're riding along, and you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Okay, y'all go ahead and go. I'm not going to try to keep you here. You guys just run off up there into the canyon, and I'll see if I can't catch up with you.
The only good thing about that is you saved your questions for the next one.
Well, as a matter of fact, I actually do that. And sometimes actually during the conversation, during the GabFest, while everyone's chit-chatting, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'll go in and I'll look at the questions coming up, and we may have already mentioned something, you know, we may have already alluded to some question that I have coming up, and I'll just X that question and then move on to I'll change the art and just post a new question up, because you don't want to ask a question that you just spent an hour answering, you know, because sometimes you'll start asking one question and then that'll evolve into like a second part of that question. You know, one of the most interesting things that we talked about once was, what was the best piece of advice you got as a creator? And then the second question was, what was the worst advice that you got as a creator? And man, that was really interesting. I mean, as a creative person, I thought I'd heard everything. You know, I thought I'd heard every avenue of good and bad that people can describe, but that was very interesting. Some of the answers were like, I never expected that, you know.
How would you answer those questions?
Let me see. The best piece of advice, my gosh, I have to think about that. I know I said something clever, and I think the best piece of advice I got was I had a mentor. His name was Tex Henson, and he was a Disney animator that lived here in the area for the last 20 years of his life. And we became friends, and he would always, he was like a homespun Texan fella, and he always had like these little things that he would say. And he told, I basically, what I learned from him was that when you live your life, you can always live it larger than, you know, what your life is. And he was always a little bit larger than life. And I realized from him is that as we age, you don't have to lose the joy of being a creator or enjoying the process, you know. So it wasn't really so much advice as it was sort of a life reaffirmation, because I'm a basically really positive person, and I think it helps me deal with some of the stuff that has come along, especially in the last year. It's been really nutty. I don't remember the worst piece of advice I ever got, but we had some really interesting other people that had some really crazy responses. Well, how about you? Can you tell me what was the best piece of advice you ever got? Is there like a quote that you have heard, or did you say, or something that influenced you? Because
that's difficult for me because,
it's a hard question to answer, isn't it?
well, a lot of the stuff that I've experienced myself, though, is just from trial and error. So, so I was a TA in university, a teaching assistant for a podcasting course. So going back to university for me, I was 33 years old, and I did 4 years of my life for visual arts and film. And besides all the stuff that I had previously learned, I think for me it was looking at the younger generation that was following up, that with a 20-year age gap. They're yeah, trust me.
I know what you mean. I felt that myself over the last few years.
For me, it wasn't really a piece of advice. It was more along the lines of the grasp of technology and the speed at which they could create stuff for themselves. Not necessarily what the projects were about, but this one person in specifically, Lawrence Rains is his name. He's got to be in his 20s now. Literally created his own music video empire by just doing it. And seeing, like, going up to doing a show with Lights. She's a singer. And then going to LA and doing videos for rap musicians. And his style that he created for himself as basically a white kid, Caucasian, in those types of industries, he set himself apart. And to see people setting themselves apart was kind of the greatest spark that I could enjoy from watching them create.
Well, people will give you a lot of. I know in my experience, sometimes people say something like to an aspiring artist or creator, and they'll say something that's derogatory, that's mean, or troll-like. And I know at least one person who quit creating because they got so it intimidated them so bad they couldn't handle it, and they just stopped. But on the other hand, sometimes people get motivated. They're like, well, I'll show you. I've known a few people that started off. I remember seeing their drawings when they were just starting out, and I was thinking to myself, just keep going, you're going to do okay. But I was like, this is a beginning. It's not a good beginning, but it's a beginning. And then, after so many years pass, I run into them again, and I'm looking at their work, and I'm like, what happened to you, So good and bad advice, I think that just depends on how you take it, because, and that was kind of what the general overall theme was that if it's good advice, take it. You don't have to take every opinion that people give of you, of your work, because critics are, that's what they are. They're critics. They criticize, so it's like they used to say, if you can't make art, be a teacher or something like that. It's almost like you can't succeed this way, then you can go this other direction. And I'm like, I really feel like you go as high as you want. The only limitation is self-imposed. If you decide that, have you ever seen an artist that you really admire, and have you ever seen them post any images of some of the work that when they started out, and you've seen the comparison of 20 years or whatever?
Yeah, I've seen
It's
those.
so interesting. I will see an artist that I really admire, and then I'll see some art that they did when they were in high school or something, and I'm like, wow, the makings of you. I would never have looked at that and said that was going to evolve into that.
Yeah.
So advice, and I think it's just a matter of each individual person has to decide, what's going to stop them or what's not going to stop them. If you decide that and it happens in the other extreme too. Sometimes you'll see an artist or a creator who's stuck
Hmm.
in a certain style and they haven't evolved over. I do caricatures for a living, and I run into these old time caricature artists, and I see their work, and I'm like, so how long have you been doing this? And they'll say, oh, 30 years or 25 years, and I'm like, really? Because I work with them over time, and me myself, I always strive to get better. I always want to kind of condense the line. I want to make it more interesting for me, and it's a challenge, but I'm always trying to improve if I see a way to make it. And then I see people that don't do that, and I'm wondering, well, I guess some people get to a point and then they just flatline.
Yeah.
And you probably see this in all other industries too, where someone gets into a certain shtick,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't. And maybe there's a plus to it, to keep a brand, but at the same time, as a creator, as an artist, especially, I want to. I've got some stuff in the works now that the style's a little bit different than what I'm working with now, only because I don't want to keep doing the same thing over and over again. I want to, I'm constantly trying to see if I can't, go in another direction.
Actually,
And,
that kind of brought up an interesting point. So one of my first video interviews I did when I was at C2E2 was with Jill Thompson.
mm-hmm.
Extremely talented creator. I mean, she
Yes.
Scary Godmother, Sandman, etc. I mean, something along the lines of her drawing. I go, you have such a varied style between Sandman and Scary Godmother. How did you find your style? And she goes, well, when I was at the art institute she was in, I think it was SCAD or something like that. She said they gave us a variety of projects. So from creating soup cans to advertisements to Japanese sword fighting to etc. And she kept listing a bunch of these things. And she said, in order for me to get better, I had to say yes to everything that came across my plate. And that's the only way that I improved as an artist. So it didn't matter what they gave to me, even throughout when I started my career to what I'm currently doing. It didn't matter if I didn't know how to draw soup cans or how to draw a samurai or how to do any of this stuff with watercolor or with whatever. I had to force myself to learn it to get better because this is the industry I wanted to be in. I'm paraphrasing.
That's really, really great. That's the thought process. I think that will lead you to more success, to be more comfortable. I've been recently watching on YouTube. There's been an interesting. There's a Japanese manga artist who interviews other manga artists, and I don't remember his name, but it's very fascinating because they'll go into these manga artist studios, and they'll for 4 days they videotape them drawing and film them creating from the initial idea to the sketch, and they all have different ways of doing it. And the common thing that I find with every one of these interviews is they'll say something along this lines, and they'll say, well, I really didn't think it was that good. I knew I could have done it better. So, and it's basically, I think it's a general truth to a lot of artists that I know, creative artists, creators, is that, sometimes you think it's really not as good as I imagine it to be, or there's always a sense of, I don't know, there's a sense of doubt, It's like, and I think part of that, I mean, I'm looking at these manga artists, okay? So these guys have hundreds of thousands of fans. They are huge. I mean, I don't personally know their work that well, but I know from what they say in the interviews, these people have been around for 25 years. And even these people who have done, I mean, manga is one of the most grueling jobs you can do. I mean, it's a daily, and you see all the detail they put. It's not just wham bam, thank you, ma'am. And a lot of them still work with dip pins and all that stuff. And it's hours per panel. I mean, all these cross hatchings and it's what I'm talking about. It's really it's astounding. But even someone who does it every single day and has at the top of their game, they'll have some doubt. And I honestly feel like, as a creative person, and I know I've had this discussion with a lot of creative people. They say, well, self-doubt is part of my process. And I understand, because you can't just get up in the morning and go, oh, everything I do is just fantastic. I think that's how you improve. If you always have that little feeling that I could have done it better, or I very rarely draw a panel and come back to it and go, oh my gosh, I hit that nail on the head. I couldn't have done that better. But sometimes, to be honest with you, I'll go back through some of my original art and I'm flipping through the pages and I'm looking at these drawings that I did, and I just took the brush and I just, and it just, it wasn't even much time. And I'm thinking to myself, how did I do that? I don't know if I could do that again. So, I mean, it's a discovery process too, because I have a tendency to work really loosely. When I sketch, my rough sketches are really loose. And then you see these manga artists, and they draw every little eyelash on the pencil sketch. I mean, they spend as much time on the pencil sketch as they do on the actual ink. Well, you've seen some of this stuff.
Yeah.
But you see this art, Kurt, and it's like they'll have a panel, one big panel, and it'll be like 50 animals, like elephants and lions and tigers and all this stuff. And there's a guy playing a piano in the middle of this forest with all these animals. And I'm like, dear God in heaven, first of all, I would never write a story that has that many dang animals in it, because I don't want to draw a giraffe. I don't want to have to do all that. I mean, and they have every little spot in the right spot. Oh my gosh. I guess that's one of the best parts about being a writer, artist, is that I don't want to draw it. I'm not gonna write it.
And that's why they have Clip Studio and clip art pieces that you can just throw in there. Just make it easy.
Yeah, Clip Studio. Clip Studio is one of my. I do mostly digital now. I used to do nothing but pen and ink, but about a year and a half ago I switched over. And that program is actually made just for manga, and they have pretty much everything, all of it all under control. You can draw with a bamboo pen, you can draw with a brush, and I use it a lot. But I can tell you that I can mimic the brush pretty good in that manga. The only thing in that studio, the only thing that I can't do is, when you're working with a brush or a pen or a dip pen or something, there's a little bit of a wobble. There's a little, the line is not perfect, and when you're drawing digitally, in my experience, no matter how, unless you use a really rough brush, everything kind of has a tendency to look really kind of slick. There's a little slickness to it that you lose a little bit of that because you're not dealing with the texture of the paper. You're basically just drawing wherever the image area, the line is. You're going to get that smooth line, and that's how I see it. So I can see my work from when I was doing pen and ink, and then compare it side by side with the digital, and I can tell you which one. Of course, I drew it, so I know, but I can tell you because I can see it. But I remember asking once. I did some panels. I put some panels up or something, and I said, Can you guys tell me which is which was done with brush and which was done with pen and ink? And nobody could. They guessed, but they didn't get it. They couldn't tell. So that might be just me.
Going back at your old work.
Oh yeah.
And this is why I think I've been really hesitant about re-releasing the old podcast, because
it works on every level, doesn't it?
But to be perfectly honest, they're shit.
Yeah. Well, don't beat around the bush, Kurt. I'm not quite sure exactly what you mean.
Well, I didn't want. You're from Texas. I didn't want to sugarcoat your iced tea more than it is, but I mean,
well, you got that right.
so. But here,
what do you mean though? Because I remember your interviews from way back. You've always been a very good interviewer. Are you talking more in terms of the technical aspects of it?
it's the technical.
Okay.
But
yeah,
but it's also, but like with everything, you gain experience. You know what to do. You know what not to do. And this is the same with art. It's the same with podcasting, because I know the audio quality was horrible back then.
Oh yeah.
I know that. The fact that there was no set time, it was a 2-hour block, and this is what we did, and this is who we interviewed, and we segued more than we probably should, and there was no real format. So the same with...
But that they were done live, right? You just hit the record button and went all the way through, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So you would get like ambient sounds and like people dropping dishes in the background. But Kurt, don't you realize that's it? That's raw. That's the cutting edge.
And this is why I don't want to edit them either. But I know that the society in general, there's probably things we said 12 years ago that isn't quite kosher these days. Yeah. It's just things like little things. So going back and reviewing your artwork, personally for me, I think is a death sentence for an artist, because now you're trying to correct what you've experienced and what you've learned over time, because now you have your style, or you've evolved your style from where you started. But I think that the original artwork, the fact that you put that time into making the wavy lines and the style that you started with to where you are currently, that's progress, that's experience, that's talent that you've put yourself through to make what you're currently creating. And like you said, you can always get better.
Yeah. Well, see, on the same token of that, though, sometimes I look back and I'm like, I'm really asking myself, what was going on in my mind at the time for me to, first of all, come up with that particular concept, and second of all, how did I draw that? I mean, I know it sounds weird, but you've heard of this thing called happy accidents, where an artist will do something and they're like, they could never recreate it because the pen went this way and I meant to go that way. And that's also kind of, to me, that's a little bit of it's a nice experience. It's not always good. I look at the characters when I started, and I'm like for that little boar character I told you, the dog, he looked like he ran into the back of a pickup truck. I mean, his face was just this flat. He was like a crescent roll with a flat face, and just like a pug would be. But he's really evolved. He's actually got a nose now and a muzzle. I didn't used to have that when I started. And all the characters were really big up here, and they had these little squat legs. It was almost like they looked like potato people. And even Zombie Boy, he was like this. He looked like a bell with these 2 feet sticking out underneath the bell. I mean, his legs were really tiny, but over the years, I've kind of elongated everything, because I'm like, a good thing that artists can do if they develop characters is, and there's a name for it, but I can't think of it, is just to make a black silhouette of each character and put all the characters like in a row. And if you can tell who the character is just by the silhouette, then you've done a pretty good job. And I learned that from my animation experience, and that is where if you want to develop a character that connects well and is real clear on the screen. So, of course, I'm generalizing because you watch some of this anime and these guys have stuff sticking all over the place, and you're like, how the hell did they draw that? Where did they come up with all that? The exoskeletons and the mask and the it's really fast.
A lot of either drugs, caffeine, or a combination. But it is also Japan, Korea, and the Asian countries.
Yes, and they're really tech oriented, and they're really good about the how things connect and how they would actually work.
Yeah.
Now, if I were going to draw, as a matter of fact, I recently did a comic strip where it was these two giant robots.
I saw that.
Uh,
That was amazing, by the way.
well, I couldn't have done that. I had to go in and look at some old manga and figure out how they would put their figures together. But I wanted them to look funny. But I wanted them to look funny. But I wanted them to actually look like they could exist.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I got to tell you something. I had an idea about you. Maybe you can tell me what
Sure.
you think of this. Okay, so my gag was it's just an animation. You saw it where they're punching each other. It's like Rock'em Sock'em Robots. And I thought, okay, so that was the last strip I did, and that was a little while back. I thought I would redo that strip as if it had been playing for the last month, and have them all beat up. It's like all that's left is just them, like up in the tiny little balls at the top, and all the other parts are laying off the ground. And Zombie Boy and his friend, they've long gone. These two people have just been punching each other. Because when you do an animated GIF, that's the fun of it. You see it a million times, you never get tired of it.
Oh, and that's the funny thing. If you and I don't know if you've looked at TikTok or anything like that, but
I do.
So it's a similar concept. It's just now more live action animated GIF is really what I feel like.
TikTok. A friend of mine who I really value her opinion. She's really. In fact, she was on one of our Gab Fest. Cone Johnson is her name. We did a whole Gab Fest on social media, and she was saying she thought that TikTok was a really good outlet, a good venue for creative people, because, especially artists, because you can spend the whole minute just showing how you draw something. And she was like, that's a great platform for people that like to, show how they create.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but I love watching creators work. That's one of my, when I get on Instagram and I see an artist drawing and sketching, I'm like all into that. I'm like, oh, that's really fascinating, because to me, that process, and that was the thing about those manga artists, it was so fascinating to watch them conceive of the idea from a little doodle, basically, and then they'll do a cleanup version of it in pencil, and then they'll go back in and ink it. It's like the stages. But I was just, fascinated watching them draw the eyes, and a lot of the manga is very dramatic. The faces are, there's always something happening. Even when they're just sitting and talking, there always seems to be somebody going. They're it's very dramatic. It's almost like we have what they call telenovelas down here. It's like Spanish soap operas.
Yeah.
And all the characters are very dramatic.
Exactly.
And it's like over the top. And to me, if you're going to draw manga, you might as well make them look like. And the other good thing about manga is, if they drop something on their foot or something happens, they'll turn into these little round characters with these big eyes, with these little sweat balls popping up. Yeah. What's that called?
They're called chibi. Yeah, they're called chibi.
Oh my gosh, I love that. So you talk about you can only do that in a visual way, to show that same character that you just showed with all the tears coming out of their face and all realistic, and then all of a sudden they're like these little round circles with these big round eyes.
Or the fact that if they're dumbfounded, it's just like the two big eyes and just like simplistic, and they're just like a straight line for the mouth, and it's just like those little triangles or whatever that appear.
Yeah, I saw a funny thing. I don't know if you know that comic strip called Kathy.
Yeah.
It's Kathy Geiswhite is the artist, and the guy was saying something along the lines of, I have never seen so much sweat come out of a person. He's like, she needs to really go see a doctor about that, because she'll be angsting about something, and there'll be like 1,000 sweat drops popping off.
I mean, she must have at least lost 20 pounds when it came to the pandemic. So.
I thought to myself, you know what? She's pretty much sweating every time you see her. She's either crying and sweating, or she's nervous and sweating.
Yeah.
This poor girl, she's going to have a hydrosis or something. She's going to dry up.
Oh, gosh. Let me ask my last 4 questions here, because we've touched on so many wonderful topics as we've gone about this interview, and truly, Mark, it's wonderful talking with you about all this stuff. It's a great segue overall.
Like I say, you're a great conversationalist. The secret of a podcast and all this stuff to me is, it's just two people or a group of people having a conversation. And if they're boring people, it's not going to be very interesting. I've seen some pretty dry interviews, and I'm like, oh my goodness. But if everybody is on board and you're just having a back and forth, that's the best.
Yeah,
that's the best.
Trust me, I've had dry interviews as well, so I understand.
What do you do when you have? I guess there's not much you can do, but what do you do when they? Um, I'll give you a good example. The other day, I had contacted the government. I was talking to someone from the employment, and he got on the phone and he said, "Hello, my name is blah blah blah. I'm with number such and such." And then I said, "Oh, hey," and then I went through this whole spiel of what I was calling about, and then there was this pause that was like, it seemed like it was about a minute, and he didn't say anything. And then he goes, "Well, let me see if I can't pull that up for you." and then I was like, "Okay." And then there was this big pause, this big gap. And I said, after a while, I said, "Are you still there?" And he was like, "Yes, I'm still here." And then I said, "Well, listen," I said, "please make some noise or something, because I'm getting really nervous over here because you're not saying a word." He was like, I guess I'll do that. And I was like, I guess that was just his style.
Everyone has one or two people that kind of inspired them on their path to where they are today. Who was that for you?
Let me think about that for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Who inspired me? I would have to say, I spoke of him earlier, Tex Henson, who was really a mentor for me in the last 20 years of his life. He passed at the beginning of the 2000s. But knowing him personally, and then knowing the stuff that he did over his lifetime, and to be around that joy of someone who, I'm of the opinion that cartoonists, especially, they live long lives because they enjoy so much of what they're doing. It's a fulfilling experience, I think, if you're doing something that you really love. And he didn't inspire me. He didn't influence me as much creatively. He helped me start an animation company back in the 90s. And he trained a staff of animators. He was sort of like the animator emeritus in the studio. But to get back to the point, he was a person who had, as he got older, he had disappointments, like we all do. He didn't particularly have the best life, but he had the best creative life, if that makes any sense. So he was able to inspire people and bring a sense of wonder to just everyday situations. And he has been a big influence on me. I can't, there's not really much day that doesn't pass where I might think about him or what he might say in a particular situation. And as I get older, I appreciate the fact that he never lost his sense of his joyful qualities that he had. And I'd have to say it was Tex Henson. And he worked as a script writer for Disney, and he was one of the co-creators of the Chip and Dale characters. And he has a long list. I could go run down the list, but he worked on the Bullwinkle Show and Casper and Popeye. And then later in his life, he got into animating commercial work. He did a lot of stuff for, like the Raid commercials and that kind of thing. He worked on the Tricks the Rabbit when it was starting out, and but he retired, and then he spent the last 20 years of his life just inspiring people. So if I could inspire one person or make someone feel good about, that's what I like about what I do, is that I'm able to inspire or maybe bring a little sense of joy to someone, and that's why I consider that if I do something that I like and it brings me joy, then hopefully that'll pass on to the next another person.
You mentioned a group as well.
Well, in that aspect, I was talking in terms of artists that have inspired me over the years, that I continue to go back to and look at their work and look at how they did something, or they were very influential on me as a young artist. And as I get older, I start to see that influence more, because I think you become purer as you get as your time passes. You don't mess around with stuff that unless it's moving you forward. Like, for instance, a lot of artists get looser and more simplified. Like Picasso's a good example. As he got older, his work just got more childlike, and that comes from the I think what it is, you're whittling down to just the basics. And of course, they're not all artists do that. Some artists just get more and more detailed. But I think being an artist is, for me, as personally, is trying to figure out a way to simplify it and get the point across without, basically without spending too much time on it. Because I'm not one of those people that can sit and, spend 18 hours on this one little face and this one little panel. I remember when I worked at a company, an auction company, and I was in the original art, comic strip art, and comic book art section. And we would get these beautiful Sunday comic strips from like the 50s, 40s, and 50s. And one of them was Flash Gordon by a guy named Macra Boy. He was an artist who worked on the Captain Marvel back in the 30s and 40s. In fact, he was a cover artist for Captain Marvel Jr. for many years. He did all those really wonderful covers with all the pen and ink and cross hatching and stuff. Anyway, there was this frame where it was set in the desert, and there was this group of men riding these camels way off in the distance. They were just up on a dune way back in the background. And if you hold the artwork up really close and look at it, you can see he had actually pen and inked the eyelashes of these camels. I mean, when you think about, being this big and then reducing it down to whatever size it would be in the paper, you're talking about probably a third of what the original size was. You're not going to see any of that. You're not going to, none of that's going to print. But the artist had to put that in there because that's just his personal expression.
Amazing.
I say camels, but it was a Flash Gordon comic strip. If I'm not mistaken, it was some kind of alien camel-looking character. But I mean, that's. I think that's just, he did that just to satisfy himself. It made it something that made it interesting to him. And I think that's why artists, some cartoonists, live a long time, because they're happy. They're happy in the creation of whatever it is that they're doing. Even Charles Schultz, the creator of Peanuts, he did something like, I don't remember, I can't even guess how many comic strips he did over his lifetime. But it was over 50 years, more than, I'm sure somebody will correct me on that, of daily comics. And as he got older, his line got looser and looser. And you look at the early work, it's real tight, and the characters all look like, big heads and little bitty bodies. And as he got older, it got looser and looser. And I prefer his later stuff to his earlier stuff, because I think he really kind of became one with his line. But I mean, as far as group, if you mention group, it would be a bunch of different artists who inspired me over the years.
Okay.
One of my biggest inspirations as an artist is a guy named Warren Kremer. And he was an cover artist, but he did comic strips for Harvey Comics. He did like a ton of Richie Rich covers and Richie Rich interior pages, and Spooky and Hot Stuff, and all those really little Dot and Little Lotta. I don't know if you are familiar with any of those characters, but they were all brands of the Harvey Comics, and his work was so. His drawings were so beautiful, and they'd have these beautifully inked lines, and there was nothing in there that didn't need to be part of it. It was very almost coloring book-esque, it was real I don't want to say flat, but there were no noodling lines. It would just be just what he needed to say. And his covers were really like, he would have like, you know, Casper,
Yeah.
the comic. He would have like Casper reaching his hand like through the door and unlocking the door from the other side. You know, things like that. You know, just because he's a ghost, he has to, you know, he can reach through the wall.
Yeah.
But there was all this like little Lotta or little Dot was this girl who was obsessed with dots. So all the covers were nothing but just like different variations of what you could do with dots, you know. And then little Lotta, she was this heavy, really heavy set girl. And her shtick was that she just loved to eat. And she was just this big, you know, big, happy, like Baby Huey type character. And I remember one that really just cracked me up was she was going to school and she had her lunchbox was a refrigerator that she had strapped on her back. Now, I don't know how politically correct it would be these days, but man, it was a hoot for me back in those when I read them the first time. And of course, you know, Hot Stuff, right? Hot Stuff, the little demon with the diapers. Little devil. I mean, he would have his shtick was nothing about just being a little devil. I mean, there was all flames were everywhere, and you know, he'd be out on a hot beach, you know, and he'd be the only one smiling, and everybody else is just dying to beat, you know, that kind of thing. But no, there's been a lot of artists that have influenced me.
From a professional standpoint, you've been in animation. You've done this comic for over 30 years with Zombie Boy Comics. You've transitioned into social media, internet conventions. You've done so much with your life, and you've become professionally successful. Do you consider yourself personally successful?
That's a very good question. Well, actually, I can say this. I can tell you I do believe that I'm personally successful, because when I was young and just starting out, all I ever really wanted to do was be an artist and make a living being an artist. And in my career, I've done all kinds of art. As a matter of fact, what I do for a career now is not something that I would have been doing for a career 10 years ago. But it's art. And I'm at a point now in my life where I get up and I go to a studio and I do art. I make art, and I'm making a living. I don't have to worry about, you know, I've done my share of corporate jobs and jobs that I didn't really care, you know, to be doing, but I did it because I needed to pay the bills. And in that aspect, I think I'm super successful. And I have other friends that are artists as well that I've known for many years who are doing something completely different now artistically than when they started, but they're very happy and fulfilled in what they're doing, and they're making a living. So yeah, I feel like I'm personally successful. I'm not a household name or anything like that, and I do have my people that, you know, readers that do read what I do, and I know people, but I was never all about it being about me. To me, it was always about expressing myself, and I couldn't be happier with the fact that I was blessed with some talents to be able to do something. Like I've always feel sorry, well, not really sorry, but I always feel like I'm blessed, because when I see people that always say, I couldn't draw a stick figure or whatever, and I would tell them, well, you know, when I started out, I couldn't either. You know, the difference between someone who wants to be an artist and someone who is an artist is that they do art. You know, it's like you have to keep drawing. You can't just do one drawing and go, well, I did this drawing and now I'm done, but I'm not good at it. Well, nobody's good when they first start out. You know, no dancer just gets up and does a ballet right there on the you know, on Broadway the first time they start dancing. You know, you have to work up to it. It takes years of dedication, you know, and you have to be interested enough and keep doing it. You know, when people tell me, how do you do that? I'm like, people I think when they see it and it seems so easy to some people, or they can't quite figure it out. they don't realize that, that's an accumulation of, 50 years of my, well, 45 years of my life. It's not like I just woke up and got a pencil and just now I'm making a living. No, I had to work at it. It's a dedicated process. Yes, I feel successful. I'm happier than I've ever been, and I'm satisfied. And we're in a time where you can be an artist and get your work out there, and people can see it. You do have a lot of other people doing the same thing, but that's not the point. The point is you are doing the process. You should. I feel like I'm happy with the creative production of it, and not so much concerned of how it, what kind of reaction I'm going to get from anybody else. Because if I did all my work for someone else, then what's the point of doing it? I tell people that a lot of times. I'm like, if you don't enjoy something that you're doing, why the heck would you do it? It doesn't matter if you think, oh well, if I post every single day, I'm going to get an audience. And yeah, there are people out there that probably have done it that way. But to me, it's if I'm not enjoying the process, I don't want to. Why waste? Why do I want to? Why would I waste my time? That's kind of how I look at it.
The opposite of success is failure or disappointment, however you want to view it. How do you deal with your failures?
Well, I think maybe it's less of a failure for me, or to look at it as a failure. It's more of a disappointment, maybe. And when I was younger, in my career, I've had some incidents that happened over in the past that were soul sucking. I could go into some detail, but I'll just leave it at that. I was in the children's entertainment for a number of years, creating intellectual properties. And long story short, I created something that became pretty good, pretty interesting. And then it was sort of like pulled out of my hands and passed on to another group of people that didn't have the same sense of how the overall concept of it. And it just kind of it was basically a crash and burn after that. But the process of losing that was like it was just a really big disappointment, a real big shattering of some hopes and dreams that I had, and my personal feelings, but I dealt with that. It took some time, but I dealt with it. The way to handle, I think, that to handle disappointments is, first of all, you have to have an attitude that you're not going to let it. Even though I say this, it's not easy. It's almost impossible to do. You're not going to let it affect you because you're a creative person, so you understand this. We have to have that emotional part of our creativity to be able to do what we do. If we were if we could detach ourselves emotionally from everything that we're doing, I don't think we'd make anything good, unless it be like an app or something. It would be technically good, but as a creative person, and you understand this, you wear part of your heart. As part of your heart is invested in whatever it is that you're doing, and that could be everything from a little sketch of your sketchbook to a animated cartoon on Netflix. My point is that I'll just say it for myself, I couldn't produce and do the stuff that I do if I didn't have a major part of myself invested in it. So you have to learn how to detach yourself. The failures that might be a failure because of something that was completely out of your control. Like I've been through that. And I think it's just a process. I honestly feel like it's like a 12-step program. You have to get to the point towards the end where you actually just accept it, but you go through all these emotional ups and downs um, in the process. And you really have to have some sense of self-respect and some sense of caring enough about yourself that you don't let it just uh, basically burn you out. And it's unfortunate. I do know people who have had failures who have not quite ever gotten over it. And they just decided, you know what? I tried it. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm just going to, binge watch TV for the rest of my life or whatever, And that's that to me, that's really sad, especially if you really do have a genuine voice and you really have a lot to offer. You really just have to learn to accept failure or disappointment as part of the process. It's interesting when you read biographies or you see biographies of people that you think have these perfect lives, and then you see all of what's happening behind the scenes, and you realize, you know what? I mean, very successful people have gone through crap. I mean, much more crap than some of us have been through, and they overcame it. They didn't let it stop them. It happens to even people that you think have these charmed lives. They've gone through their share of failures. I think failure is just there's some kind of quote where it's just an opportunity. A failure is just an opportunity to maybe do something better the next time.
Yeah.
So as you can tell, I have a really positive. I try to keep a positive outlook. I feel like when that situation happened with me in my past, that creative situation, it took a toll on me. I was, there was a period of time where it affected me, and I just, it was almost like you just lose your sense of it's like almost like losing your sense of taste or smell. It's almost like you're kind of numb to the experience. But while that was happening, I was also still creating other things. So I used that failure to swing back into doing something else that was more beneficial to me. But all that time that was going on, I was having to go ride those waves of depression and self-doubt, and why you have to learn not to wallow in it, because if you want, you can sink all the way to the bottom and just be done with it. But I've got a lot of padding here, so I'm going to probably float a little bit more.
The younger generation is looking at your work and becoming inspired by your creative process, either because of Zombie Boy or because of Gabfest or because of your past work in animation. How can they inspire the generation that follows them?
Good question. Well, I think that the secret to that is that just be your authentic self. Be true to who you are, and be true to what you're producing, and be dedicated to it as much as you can. And you'll like me inspiring someone else, a generation behind me, you will be inspiring that generation, because just by being who you are as a creative person. Because I can't really specifically tell you what you have to do. All I can say is that I learned the people that inspired me were people that I looked at their work and were around them, and I absorbed some of the things that they were showing me, and even just I can name pretty much any artists that I admired growing up. I never personally met any of them. As a matter of fact, I grew up reading comics in the late 70s and through the 80s, and these comic book artists that I admired all those years, it's weird when you see them on social media or on Facebook and you see a picture of them, you're like, man, he or she is older than I thought they were, because when you look at the art, it's timeless. I mean, it's like, yes, of course it was done 30 years, 35 years, 40 years ago. But it's timeless. It stands the test of time. And when you actually see the person who created it, I personally didn't expect them to look old. I just thought they'd still look like a young person, because that's goes back to the inspirational part. And now, with social media and everything moving at such a accelerated pace, I'm wondering, these younger people, it's not going to be too much longer past their point when someone else is coming along and they're going to be inspired by that. It's like a big wheel that just keeps turning and turning and turning. I think if I inspired anybody, the only reason that I did inspire somebody is because I just put my heart and my soul into the creation of it. And I never once thought, what can I do that's going to be popular? Or what can I do that somebody will read and want to copy me, or thinks it's so great that they want to draw in my style? Because all I ever wanted to do was just be, like I said, be my authentic self, and enjoy the process. So if a younger creator comes along and is doing something really amazing, and they're being true to what it is that they want to do, and they're enjoying the process, of course they're going to inspire people too, and especially now, because it's like instantaneous, like back in the days, you have to get your work published, and then the audience would see it. You didn't have an internet to throw it up there at a minute it's done, before the ink was even dry. You had to go through a process, and sometimes you would do something and it would not even get in the public eye. Like when I was self-publishing, I would draw it and put it all together and then submit it, and then they would advertise it, and then they would collect numbers, and then they would tell me what they needed, and then after all that was over with, then I could publish it or print it and send it. So it was a process. But now it's like I don't need to wait all that time. In fact, I just did this doodle. I'm going to go scan it. I'm going to put it up right now as soon as we finish talking. I just feel like there's such a rapid pace to it now that I just wonder, and we do have so much of information and visual information and story information and comics and animation all coming to us all at one time. It's an amazing time, but I think that an artist or a creator really needs to be honest with themselves. And if your work is true to who you are as a creative person, then surely you will inspire someone, because not everything that I was inspired by growing up was done just purely for the love of it. Comic books, the comic book industry, that's not how that is. They give you a script and you draw it, or you write the script and you draw it, and it's a business, But at the same time, there are some people out there that's what they love. They love, I'm going to draw a skyscape or a cityscape, and I'm going to do the best cityscape anybody ever drew, and that's a challenge. Personally, me, oh my gosh, I won't put a cityscape in anything. Really want to know the truth. I don't want to draw all those windows, and all that perspective. You can keep that.
Like the giraffes.
Yes, like the giraffes. I don't want to draw all those spots. I remember I did this one strip, and it was like well, it might even go back to that strip that we were talking about at the beginning of the show with the little chicks. Mm-hmm. There were like 50 chicks in each frame, and each one was hand done, and they all were different. They all had different expressions. And after like about the second frame, I was like, I wrote on Twitter, I was like, why the heck did I start drawing this? I don't want to draw all these chickens. I'm tired. My hand doesn't. I don't want to draw this. Mm-hmm. That's really rare when I would put that many characters into one panel. I just wouldn't. I don't have the patience. Make it a circle with two dots, and I'm good. I joke about it. I don't really mean it honestly, but but it does, as a creative person, as an artist, it helps me, because I can decide how many sometimes I'll write a bunch of characters and then I'll like, no, I don't want to draw all those characters. I'll just make it like 3 characters rather than the whole cast, you know. But sometimes in a comic strip, it's good to put all your characters in so that because they can get forgotten after a while if you don't use them,
For sure.
So anyway, as far as inspirational goes, you can also be inspired by all kinds of things. I mean, not just people. There's stuff on YouTube that I watch, and it just inspires me like nobody's business. Just because I'm like, wow, how did they do that? And what was the thought process? And it could be anything from sculpture to glass blowing to ceramics. I mean, all kinds of even needlework and knitting and stuff. You see these things, and you're like, that's not something that I would do, but it inspires me when I see other people, creating it. So, you being a media person, I'm sure you get inspired by all kinds of different things, not just artists and musicians, but I mean, the technical part of it.
Yeah, but I've done it for so long that I kind of it's the background. But when I see creative people that are doing their artwork, or even if they're like say models and photography, like photography is something I focused on in university, and I was a model as well. So for me, it was just providing the lighting, the shape, so film and art. That the reason why I did a double major, just real quick, is that a guy I was working with saw the show, and he was a recruiter for Ryerson University's hockey team. We worked side by side in the call center thing. And so he inspired me to go back to university, because he's like, whenever you go to a comic convention, the week leading up to it, you're really excited, and then you come back from it and you're like depressed. His words, not mine. But he could see the mood change. And so it was like, you should take your show and apply it to university. So applying it to university was my first step, but using the technology that I learned a lot more about the visual art side of things, and how color theory and how shadows and how light and how everything just plays into video that I was taking for granted when I would look at, say, comics, for instance, and graphic novels, and the detail that you put in as an artist and a creator with everything that you've done with that. I could transition to media. I could transition to film. I could set a tone of a scene, or a musical guest would come on and see how they would light their things specifically for whatever song that they would do, etc. Little things like that. And that got me excited to be in media and to do what I do and to use what I've learned. And doing these types of video interviews, it's the same thing. It's like, I see that your creative process has evolved in 30 years. I see that you've learned from your past mistakes. I've seen that you're continuing to grow even as you're later on in your life because of what you've experienced. And so if I can showcase that from a media perspective, if I can showcase that in my interviews, it doesn't matter what questions I ask, it's about the people themselves. And one of my taglines is, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to help bring that out. Because like every other creative person, I may appear to be an extrovert, but in reality, I'm an introvert. I could easily sit behind a computer, be alone, solo, etc., and I'd be happy.
You're preaching to the choir, buddy. You're preaching to the choir.
But, and this is the side note, this show has brought me out of my introverted shell. So when I talk with a creative person, I'm not expecting you to be extroverted. I'm not expecting you to change how you act on a day-to-day basis when I'm asking you these questions. But it goes back to a previous thing of dry interviews or hard interviews, when a guest is talented but they can't express themselves. And how do you get through that? And the only way to get through that is to talk with them, to get them relaxed, to get them to the point of being able to express themselves comfortably. And so a green room, the previous stuff, like we had a half-hour conversation before we started. It was great. I mean, it got you relaxed. It got you in the mood. You know, we talked about a bunch of things in general, and you know, instead of just jumping in cold, you got yourself warmed up just by talking, and that's the best way that I can describe any process. Is you warm up to it, you experience it, you change your style, you're listening to how they're talking back to you, and maybe the questions you originally had focusing on a certain area, you would take away and replace with something else. And it's difficult because everyone is different. So I can't, when I started this, I had canned questions. I literally would write down 10, 15 questions, and I would use them every single time. And it got to the point that it just felt not authentic. And I think that you have to be the introvertedness, because if you ever listen to the first 60 episodes, it was rough because I didn't have a voice. I couldn't find my voice because I didn't know what I wanted to do. It wasn't until episode 61 with Laura Innes that I was basically solo. And so for me, it was, how do I talk with people and not feel awkward or not seem awkward and get rid of the ums and the ahs and everything like that. And it's evolved to the point of I'm able to converse a little better. You know, my experiences in university, my experiences doing this show back in 2008 when I started at the same time as Mark Maron and his W2F podcast and all this other stuff. You know, Joe Rogan, same thing. I was actually years before Joe Rogan, but he has a fan base, and Mark Maron has a fan base, etc. Where you start doesn't matter. Where you want to go, because like you said, you can't compare yourself to other people. If you do, you're just killing yourself. It's not a great experience creatively, and it just puts you through the ringer. It's just not mentally sound.
No, but you did bring up a good point, and that is one thing that I could say about you and myself is that we persevered. You know, we kept doing it, like and we continue to do it. There's not always a brass ring at the end that or the big trophy that we're going to get at the end, but it's in the process. It's in the journey. I know that sounds a bit cliche, but it really is true. The journey is really what you need. What I am enjoying. I try not to look at the past too much and say like I can never duplicate that again. I can never do that again. Well, I don't want to do that again. It's like you were saying, you don't want to keep repeating yourself. You don't want to keep asking the same questions. It gets monotonous. It gets predictable, and you don't want that. And plus, on this journey, we've both had to learn things that we didn't know prior, and we weren't maybe so much comfortable about. Like with me, social media still is sort of an enigmatic situation. There's so much about it that I don't understand it, and I don't take the time to invest in learning all the ins and outs. So some people are just experts. They know when to post, what to post, how to post, how long it should be, when it should be, all this stuff. I'm not interested enough in it to go through all those extremes in a way that if I can do it in a reasonable amount of time and learn it, yes, I would love that. But no, there's no gurus out there going, this is how you do it, young child. I will tell you, pull up a mat and we will discuss the future. There are things out there that you can learn about. But getting back to my initial point is that we both have been in this for quite a little number of years, and I don't know about you, and I see it with you. I don't know if you see it so much with me, but there's been a constant improvement. You have the quality and the conversationalness up to it have really come a long ways, and that's purely because you have dedicated yourself to this. And it's not always rewarding, and I can say this just for myself, it's not always as rewarding as you might have imagined in your mind how things were going to be or not be. It's not always that way, but I don't focus on that. I focus on I got it done. I accomplished something. I did something that I personally enjoy, and I know you enjoy this. Kirk, there is absolutely no way in hell you would have been stuck with what you're doing right now for as long as you've done it without there being something that it brings you some there's a satisfaction to what you're doing, and like you were saying, you want to bring these stories out to people that people haven't heard those stories before. So in one way, you're just like me. You're a storyteller. You tell a story, like right now you're telling my story. And you've honored me with asking me to be on your program. And I just say this. I think it's the people that continue to do what they're doing in spite of all the obstacles and in spite of maybe not having a huge fan base and not having all this glory and all these riches and a big house and up on a hill and all that stuff. I'm not really concerned with that. I think that if that was my mindset, I would have gotten into something else, like real estate or something. We sacrifice, and you understand this, we sacrifice some of our own success, really, in some degree, by focusing on something that we know it maybe will or maybe won't. We don't know. Nobody knows the future. But I've done this for 10 years, and I don't know if I'm where I stand really in the bigger picture, but I know that I'm enjoying what I do. Yeah. I feel a sense of accomplishment. And you were saying, do I consider myself successful? Yes, I do. I do consider myself successful because I do what I want. I create what I want. And I have people who really read what I offer. And there's I have a very good response, and I get a lot of there's a lot of joy in the give and take.
Yeah.
No, and even if it's just one person that says, hey, I really enjoyed that. That was so funny. To me, it's not about I don't look at stats. I quit doing that years ago because it's depressing.
Yeah, it is.
It's depressing, but on the bigger picture, you hit the nail on the head when you said that it really isn't so much how many millions of people are watching what I'm doing. It's really a matter of I have something to say, and I'm telling my story, and my story is I'm telling your story. But it's going through I'm the one, and it's the same thing with GabFest. I set the situation up, but it's everybody else. It's not really me, but somebody has to be on the bow of the ship going, we're going this way. I'm not. There's got to be a direction to it, but at the same time, it has to be fulfilling. And I can't even imagine if I was unable to do what I'm doing. I think I would go crazy because it has been a lifesaver during these tough times that we've had over the last, years or so. And I know you feel the same.
Yeah.
And you've been constantly producing. You have never stopped. You have not stopped. Well, okay, let me just put it this way. You've been consistent.
Yeah.
Maybe, and like with me, I don't always post every single 3 times a week like I used to. I don't do that anymore because, frankly, people aren't coming to the website.
Well, Mark, I can't let you go without having you at least tell us where we can find you on social media. Let us know where we can help support you and where we can find GabFest and all that stuff as well.
Well, let's see. You can follow me. I'm on Instagram. It's Zombie Boy Comics. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter at crash_pal. You could see my strips at zombieboycomics.com. That's pretty much it. I mean, if you want to access me, I'm pretty easy to find. I want to also mention that if people are interested, we have a online event called GabFest, and we do that on Twitter, and that is comes every 2 weeks, and it's basically a conversation about creativity, and you can follow that. The hashtag is hashtag GabFest21, and it's really fun. We get a lot of great conversations on there. And so hopefully, if anybody's out there that wants to join in, they can look it up online on Twitter.
And that hashtag changes every year too.
Yeah, that's because Gabfest was already taken, and I was looking at the people that were on the original Gabfest, and I was like, oh, okay. I don't think those people are going to be interested very much in what we have to say with comics and creating. So,
For sure. Well, Mark, thanks again for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. Of course, support Mark through his social media and his website as well, too. You can find it on the lower third there, zombieboycomics.com. Look at his social media. Help follow and like his work there. He has some really amazing stuff. Tune in next week for another great interview on Two Geeks Talking, where everyone has a story to tell, and it's up to me to help bring that out. You can find us on twogeekstalking.com or tgtmedia.com, and of course our YouTube channel, youtube.com/c/tgtmedia. Thanks for listening, watch, and enjoy.
bye.
Hey, all, Kurt Sasso here from Two Geeks Talking. If you like this video and these quick clips here, make sure you take a look at our YouTube channel, youtube.com/tgtmedia. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe as well. Hit the bell to make sure you get notifications, of course, from videos like this here. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching over the years, and keep listening and watching for new and exciting interviews with talented, creative people in the entertainment industry. I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. Thank you so much.